All right, Ohio State absolutely dominates Indiana today. Weird that I thought that this game could be interesting. And remember how last year, or not even last year, last offseason, everyone was talking about who the next Indiana is going to be, or who is this year's Indiana. And it's Illinois. And I get it. Like, of course, you're going to say, well, Indiana made the playoffs, and Illinois is not going to make the playoffs this year. Well, yeah, but Illinois has a tougher schedule than Indiana did last year. Indiana's only game in the Big Ten was Ohio State last year, and they got demolished in Columbus. I was at that game. And there was nothing Indiana could really do. And yes, Ohio State did end up losing to Michigan that next week. But point is, Illinois is this year's Indiana, in the Big Ten at least. They're going to, if you are a lower tier or at their tier in the Big Ten, Illinois is going to kill you. They are. But if you are even slightly ahead of them, whether it's recruiting or development or coaching or anything like that, you're going to destroy Illinois. Ohio State just proved it. Indiana proved it a few weeks ago. And I get people saying, like, well, how is Indiana not this year's Indiana? Well, Indiana this year is much better than they were last year. And it's absolutely awesome to see as a fan of the Big Ten and teams that are in the Big Ten and want other Big Ten teams except Michigan to succeed, and Penn State too, to a degree. But, Ohio State was just the better team today, and they proved it, especially on defense. When Altmaier, and that was what I really was concerning. Illinois' style of football is run the ball, and wear you down. And Ohio State basically proved that they were mentally tougher than Illinois today. And that's really encouraging. I know these aren't similar tier level teams, but especially when we play Michigan coming up in a little bit, where their MO is going to be, we're going to tire you out and muddy the waters and make this game boring and defensive and not let Ohio State play the style of football that they want to. And that's succeeded over the past 4 years now. Michigan has done exactly what I just said, and they've beaten them every single time. And Ohio State just cannot figure out the formula to counter that. We'll see what they do this year, but regardless, this is about Illinois and Ohio State, not Ohio State, Michigan. But they proved that they were tougher than Illinois today. I was worried about Altmaier being the dual threat quarterback that he was known to be in the big moments when Illinois was, on that big run before the Indiana game. And even to a degree against USC, was that last week, maybe 2 weeks ago? I don't know what it was. But, the fact that Illinois can do that to you scared me. It did. It scared me a little bit. And Ohio State put those fears to bed by mid-first quarter, to be completely honest. By mid-first quarter, it looked like Ohio State was going to win this by multiple possessions. And they did. But it's great to see. It's very encouraging. The fact that Ryan Day continues to beat teams that are inferior to him is encouraging, apart from the Michigan games. But I feel like, Ryan Day, who coaches against every other Big Ten team, and then there's a Ryan Day that coaches against the Michigan teams. And that's what he's got to figure out. But, time will tell on if that the monkey is actually off of his back. But for Illinois, it sucks, but your year's probably over. You're not going to make the Big Ten championship. You're not going to make the playoff, probably. I don't know. They might be a fringe playoff team, but they're not. There's going to be no signature win on their schedule. The top two teams that they just went up against, they lost by multiple possessions. Now, they're a good team. They're just not a playoff caliber team. You know what I mean? But that's really what Illinois has been. They're the mid-tier to mediocre type Big Ten teams, and then they have a year where they're pretty good, and then they go back down. We'll see if that happens again next year. If Illinois just goes right back down the totem pole of the Big Ten, and it's a pattern that they're just going to have to get used to. But only time will tell. For Ohio State, it's same old, to be completely honest. The fact that Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sayin are not in Heisman contentions right now is ridiculous. Julian Sayin is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I don't think anyone is denying that. He's honestly, I saw a video of this, I think yesterday or today. Julian Sayin is basically what Arch Manning was supposed to be right now, except like the mobility stuff. But the throwing wise and accuracy wise, he was what Arch Manning was hyped up to be by people like Paul Feinbaum and all the SEC type, people on ESPN and CBS and, all that kind of stuff. But, Julian Sayin is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and the fact that he is not in this Heisman race or hasn't been, a main candidate for the Heisman yet is mind-boggling. And the fact that Jeremiah Smith is not in this Heisman conversation on the mainstream media-wise. I'm talking about mainstream media. Of course, the Ohio State fans are always going to have Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith, especially Jeremiah Smith, in the Heisman conversation. But I'm talking mainstream people that do not have any connections with Ohio State at all. They don't have those two guys, Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sayin, in this Heisman conversation. And I think that probably changed today. Jeremiah Smith had that scary injury with his back. I'm really hoping that's just a stinger and he's not going to be out too long. You go to Wisconsin next week, and I think you get a bye, and then Penn State is the week after the bye. I know that for sure. But I think it's Wisconsin next week, a bye, and then you play Penn State, who I know. Penn State is not the team that they were supposed to be this year, but they're still good. If they lose to Ohio State, they're not making the playoff, but that's an if they lose to Ohio State. Penn State is going to be extremely angry when they play Ohio State, and Ohio State cannot overlook Penn State. They can't, because Penn State's going to come in with absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain, and Ohio State's going to come in with nothing to gain but everything to lose. And that is exactly where these upsets happen. Now, does it help that Ohio State is playing at home? Yes. Is it going to be a night game? Probably not, even though it probably should be, but that's another thing. I really love, by the way, what the SEC does with their TV providers, or not providers, but like their TV contracts, where they don't allow a team to have, like, they have a set amount of time places that they can be in 1 year. So every team is not playing, and I know this isn't like, the SEC doesn't have Big Noon or anything like that. They do night games for their A+ type games. But they have, I think it's 3 or 4 that you're allowed to have at a specific time slot, and then you're not allowed to do that team again, barring like the playoff. This is during the regular season. But I love that. And the fact that the Big Ten doesn't have that, I think, is a definite mistake that they're paying for right now, especially last year when Ohio State was playing, I think it was like 4 or 5 straight Big Noon kickoff games. It was the Michigan game, the Indiana game, and then the Purdue game, I think it was maybe. But we played at noon so many times last year because Ohio State was in these style of games that everyone wanted to see. And the fact that that's a noon kickoff and then you go and turn on the ESPN at night and watch the SEC in these night environments, it's ridiculous. Now, I do think the Ohio State-Michigan game should be played at noon. I think if you're going to have a rivalry like that, you got to stay consistent with the time, which is fine with me. I'm fine with that. But, I think the rivalries like Ohio State and Penn State, like in the 2017, 2017, 2018 games, those night games with Gus and Joel on the call, especially in 2017 when Ohio State won in the big comeback with JT Barrett, iconic game. And that really was what put, Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt on the map, was those type of games at night, the big comebacks, all that kind of stuff. And you got to have these types of games at night The noon environments are great sometimes, but they are elite. And Ohio State, especially Ohio State, showed that in the playoff against Tennessee versus, the Penn State-Ohio State game that they had in 2023, which was a boring defensive battle. But I don't know. That's my rant for that kind of stuff. But this game honestly showed a lot more about Illinois and where they are at in the Big Ten rather than Ohio State. Ohio State just kind of came in, same game plan, great defensive stops in the goal line, like always. I love that. And the fact that we're doing this consistently over the past few years is great. But will we be able to do that consistently? Probably not. Could we? Yes, obviously. But is that going to be a thing that we come to expect out of Ohio State every single year? Probably not. We're spoiled, but we can't be that spoiled. That was really, I mean, Illinois, it is what it is. I don't think the people that expected Illinois to make the playoffs and go 11-1, 10-2, and they still could go 10-2, but the people that were expecting like 11-1 and especially 12-0, if anyone was predicting that, I don't know if anyone was. That was never in the cards for Illinois, especially how they've been over the past few years. I know they had a ton of returning production, but that returning production isn't necessarily good returning production. You know what I mean? But yeah, I feel like this game just took it took a lot of Illinois, honestly. It looked like Illinois was, they had their hands on their hips or on their knees. They looked tired, they looked gassed, and Ohio State just looked like they could do this all day. And that's what happens when you control the line of scrimmage and you control the pace of the game and make it your style of football. And they dominated. And I would love, especially if the Big Ten is going to do the 3 or 4 protected rivalries and then, home and away, flip-flop, that kind of thing that the SEC is doing right now. I would love for this rivalry to be a yearly thing, especially with the rivalry trophy. I love rivalry trophies in college football. I think they're one of the coolest things about college football. And it just sucks that this rivalry gets played like twice every 10 years, if that. Like the last time they played was quite literally 10 years ago. And it's just cool to see that the trophy back on the field with Jeremiah Smith holding the Illabuck. And I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that, by the way. But, it's cool to see the trophy come out and to have that consistently and to build up the rivalry would be awesome. Now, will they do that? Probably not. But they very well could. We'll see. I just don't want Ohio State's 2 rivals to be Michigan and, Penn State. I don't know. It just seems, I don't want to say unfair, but it's just really? Just because Penn State and Ohio State are just it's the Georgia-Alabama. It's the Georgia-Tennessee games. They are only rivalries because the teams are good. When Penn State was busy winning 4 to 6 games a year, this game was never a rivalry game. But as soon as Penn State won in 2016, all of a sudden, this is a big rivalry game and blah, 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 blah. This isn't a rivalry game. Penn State and Ohio State, I'm talking about. It's not a rivalry game. It never was a rivalry game. There's no name. There's no trophy. It is not a rivalry game. Now, is it a competitive game? Yes, obviously. But it's not a rivalry game. And that's my take on that. But whatever. Next thing, Iggy, he's got to get better at these penalties. He led the nation last year in penalties. I know Ohio State won the national championship, but still, got to clean those up. And he had a few today. NFL scouts are going to look at that, especially I think he's a senior this year, or if not, he's out of eligibility this year. NFL scouts are going to see that, and they're especially with a corner and the NFL with the pass interference calls, it's the spot of the foul no matter what, or if it's at the goal line, it's at the 1-yard line. NFL scouts are going to see that, and they're going to be, I don't want that guy on my team, because if that's a pass interference call, that might cost us the game. So he's got to clean those up. I know they've said, oven mitts, do something, he's got to learn to not grab, especially when the ball is in the air. He's going to be physical. That's just the way he plays, but he cannot be just grabbing on people's arms as the ball's getting there. He's got to get his head turned around. He's got to play the football. But that's really it for me. Ohio State completely shows why they are the number one team in the country. I don't think anybody is doubting that right now. If you are doubting that, you're probably a Miami fan. Let's be honest here. But yeah, Ohio State should be number one when the AP poll comes out this next week or this coming few days. And they should honestly be number one up until the Michigan game. If they can beat Penn State, great. If they lose a little bit, I mean, it sucks, obviously. But up until Ohio State should be number one until they lose a game. They should. This is one of the best defenses in the country. This is an improving offense who's just finding their rhythm over and over again, week by week. And Julian Sain is getting more and more confidence. I know the commentator said that he's becoming more of a leader and more vocal, especially in the last few weeks. But yeah, sucks for Illinois, but, is what it is. Sorry. Not really, though. Well, that's going to do it. I'll be back here for post-game of maybe halftime. I might do a halftime video tomorrow, but we'll see. For sure, post-game for the Browns game tomorrow. We're in Pittsburgh, so we'll see about that. We'll say one thing about the Browns game. What can go wrong will go wrong in Pittsburgh, so I'm not expecting a whole lot. We'll see, though. Till next time, OH.